Know anybody. I'll explain to you what we did in Canada. We had a soldier system technology roadmap. If you Google technology roadmap, soldier system technology roadmap, you'll find out all about it. We've had 8 workshops where we bring industry, academia, and the government together to brainstorm challenges that are facing soldier systems, to come up with priorities for future research, to help people form partnerships among academia, industry, and government, and help give them money to solve some of those problems. So find tables, fill out your tables, please. These are kind of small tables, so it would be better if we had full tables. And as you're doing that, I'm going to give you a little survey to do. Be the secretary.
Maybe one per table. Okay, so from our table over here, that we were over on this table right over here, our 3 heavy hitters were integration of tools and the computational resources that will be required when we integrate these tools. And integration of tools means taking all of these different little component models, trying to bring them all together, understanding all of the assumptions that are within those models, and then getting them to talk together without violating any of the assumptions of any of the tools that you're trying to bring together. So that was our first major heavy hitter, and I think that one does carry with it a lot of just a lot of open sort of tentacles. Another one was data integration, and associated with that would be the development of a consortium to oversee how data is integrated and how it should actually, what do we need to do for data integration? Is it HLA? Do we go to HLA? That is a pretty arduous process from what I understand. We've made a couple of models that have been HLA, and just the process to be tagged as HLA was enough to cause this. And then finally, suitable validation data is lacking. Again, this is very contextual, I know that, but suitable validation data is lacking.
Okay, thank you, table 1. Next table. I'm going to record all this for posterity. I'm trying.
Okay, I'm with the European Union table. All the Euros moved to one table, oddly enough, and invited me and a guy from Wisconsin to join. So the first need was clearly defined needs and requirements from the sponsor. And so that really is along the vein that, assuming you're the government sponsor, representation with the end user and the research community would be very important. And our sense is there's pretty much nothing that can't be achieved, but it gets hard if the needs of the researchers lead things, or if a disconnected government sponsor leads things. It's really that communal approach that's required. I won't say that we had 3. The second one is all about usability, where usability is defined as understandable metrics, near real-time performance, and alignment with some intuition that the end user would have either at the expert level or at the novice level, depending upon the specific task. And then I guess that adequate time, energy, and focus on validation would be a fair third item, which I just thought up when the guy before me said it. I'm hoping that everybody forgot it, and I can take credit to it.
Excellent. Thank you. You don't have to give 3 if it's been given in a previous table. You can just say we agree with our previous.
No, we made that one up. I was just going to say this is going to get a lot shorter because I'm just going to repeat everything. So it's the table in the corner in the back. Basically, the top 3, kind of a combined one, ease of use, but also on the flip side, education of the user to know how to perform an analysis using digital human tools. So there's an education component that probably starts, back in college engineering courses, where you should really have exposure to these tools and know how to use them. The second one is access to data for all sorts of reasons, but also not just for kind of very specific kind of examples like maybe behavior when clothed and with armament on, but also for things, just like common anthropometric databases. This table had a couple of software developers, myself included, and I know this is kind of a struggle. There's all these anthropometric databases from around the world available, but not really without IP restrictions. And so it's very difficult for providers to get access to these data and make them available to the larger user community.
If you want Canadian data, I will give I will give you the raw data.
And then the third one, the system integration topic.
You mean having the modules talk to each other?
Yeah. These tools talk to one another.
So I came from the table right here, right in the middle. I guess we kind of had some similar themes to previous. The first was more usable and more useful models. A couple of ideas that came up were being able to integrate clothing and equipment. I guess from my perspective, I brought up that my end users are using crash test dummies right now. We don't want to replace them, but we find ourselves in a competing position trying to validate the usefulness of our models. So I think this community pay attention a lot to the metrics that are used to validate and present the models and assess their effectiveness for research sponsors and for end users. More accurate models, and ways to quantify the accuracy of models. That kind of goes with the first one, and better validation schemes for models. And then I think the third one that came up is pretty common. More younger children. This goes along with other data sets, but we need to devote ourselves to identifying scans and better detailed geometry for much larger population, including infants, neonates, I guess, and older folks from our perspective. So to think about the entire population and try to get the anthropometry together.
Another table? I counted like 5 or 6 there. Maybe I need to see it.
So we came up with a list really just of one, but maybe some subtext on how to do that. Of course, it was the integration, but it started off as the idea of scalability. We've got some momentum with human modeling. Now I want to take it to clothing, or I want to take it to an exoskeleton. That then led to the discussion of having these models integrate. So how do you do that? Of course, we hit on open architecture. Another idea that came up was more extensive documentation, user manuals, this kind of thing. Communication. Sort of a fuzzy item, but in more of the kind of thing we're doing today. Somebody mentioned economy of force and being able to pool efforts and models that exist concurrently, but maybe don't know about each other. And the idea of consortia, where the automotive industry has done a relatively good job of this sort of thing, but it was mentioned that maybe the military branches aren't as purple as they might want to be. And I think that was about it.
And my table.
We went.
You did? Oh, I missed you, sorry. Well, that's we had 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Is that it for everyone? Oh, one more. Some of you talked about solutions already. That's the next exercise, but we're running out of time. So make sure you fill out the form at least, because what I'll do is I'll analyze the results and give that back to you at the website, or the conference organizers. I'll give that information back.
All right, I'm going to kind of skip some of the stuff that you guys have said because it's a big ditto, essentially, because everyone's essentially said the same thing in regards to interoperability. One of the things that, an interesting thing that we probably should get slapped on the hand in the industry is the industry itself doesn't know where the validation comes from, don't really feel not safe, they don't really feel comfortable using a tool that they don't know how much validation has been put into it. So that really needs to be published, needs to be reported, and as well as it needs to be expanded so people feel more comfortable using these models. I think, again, other points have already been touched on, but one other thing that we discussed is presenting more kind of precise, actionable results as opposed to raw data. A lot of people that aren't really well trained on this stuff that could potentially be using the tools need more direction in terms of what data means. Not just these forces are applied on someone, but what should you do about it? Should you move controls here, or should you move, or should you change the type of control that's used? Those sorts of things. More actionable items and results really need to be presented out of a lot of these tools. really these are more along the lines of unique. Top 3 kind of fall into the same categories that you've already said.
Are there any items that are on your personal list that didn't make it to this forum? I think we had an item about, which is along the lines of what you just said. When I get the output of this model, I want to know what is the potential risk for me causing death, injury, or discomfort. So what things do I need to address? For example, in our military, although we select pilots based on body size and shape, we're not likely to select our infantry based on body size and shape. So what's the risk? And the commander needs to know this risk too. What risk am I exposing this person to because I've encumbered him and now I've shoved him in like a sardine into this armored vehicle? What if an IED explodes? So we have to link to those models. What if there's a rollover? Will that person be killed because he's too big? The commander might want to know that. Sorry to keep relating it back to the military. I guess they seem to be nowadays a reasonable funder of these efforts. So. Okay, now there's a little bit of time left at your table to talk about innovative solutions, and I realize some of you are competitors and it makes it very difficult for you to talk about innovative solutions because you want to keep them close hold to your company. But maybe there are some innovative solutions to the problem of getting the message out, communication, some of these other things that are not necessarily proprietary issues. So we have a few more minutes left for you to do that.
So it seemed like the priorities were very similar to the challenges. So some things came up answering exercise 2, similar to exercise 1. The first one for us, we had like 5, so we made up for our lack on the first. Fatigue and injury was a big one. And then if you extend that, longitudinal studies. So what happens to somebody after 3 years of various tours? Leverage and consolidate existing data is probably a lower one on our list. Mirroring what we've talked about earlier today, dynamic analysis as opposed to simply static analysis. And we had a longer discussion about simplicity of use and the debate of whether it is possible to balance complexity with simplicity. And I think the general consensus was yes, that could be done. Through things like modularity and layered interfaces, things like that.
Thank you. And next?
The Europeans have found me to be a good envoy of their demands to the rest of the world. The things that our table's dominated more by developers, people who are developing models. And so there was a great deal of interest in predictive posture and motion to augment models that exist today. Physics-based prediction, so things that take into account avoiding obstacles and physics-based forces, as well as an interest in cognition and the cognitive effects as they would constrain different physics-based activities. And then the one government person that we had, Chris Henson, wanted to re-emphasize that we have to have end users represented in terms of what we're doing.
So we had standardization, and we had to talk about what that meant for a long time. We had to have a standardized talk about what constitutes standardization, develop a standard for that. So architecture, protocols, those types of things. The second thing that came up was identification of validation and verification schemes for the purpose of certifying some of the software packages. Certification would be a valuable thing for end users in this field. We had an extended debate about complexity and simplicity with regard to that too. And then the last thing was we had a lot of talk about open sourcing. So, and maybe not open sourcing models necessarily, but having an open source data model, which came up with our group, and a couple of examples that, like the smart building bodies that have been created to people to get together and develop sort of a data model that users can use, whether it's closed or open.
We like the certification idea.
You do?
Europeans believe intrinsically in certification. It's part of their nature, even in Hungary.
Okay, over at table, what were we
you? Table 1? Table 1.
We are table number 1. Have you ever been to Oktoberfest?
Realism of modeling, so closing the gap between cadaver data and realistic data, like actual dynamic moving data. Scalability of data, and this is going down the line of the open source sort of notion. Information sharing and extreme environment data. That's pretty tough to capture. And then once you get the extreme environment data, I know from the astronaut corps, if we get data from them, it's very hard to use it because the astronaut corps controls it. They don't want any data to go out. So it's got to be very, very, very high level. So it can't identify anything on it. And then one last one I'll just throw in because I think it's very interesting. Allocation of tasks to human or to automation. That's a real hard thing. Levels of automation and how humans can interact with technology.
Does sitting in a suit in a 95-degree room with 90% humidity count as extreme?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Not anymore. No.
Yeah.
I'm one of the members of our table design simulators for rides, roller coasters. I don't think any of us would ride on a roller coaster where the analysis for the strength of materials was determined from a static analysis. And yet, a lot of the tools that, the majority of human modeling tools that we know how to work with today for humans are statically oriented tools because we can solve that problem. We have techniques. But the dynamic tools are the ones, as soon as you're walking, you're dynamic. And the loads that the body experiences can change dramatically, either higher or lower than what your static solution will produce. So I want to beat the drum on dynamic motion because the static is really something we know how to solve. And for ergonomics, that gets you 90% of the way there. But for some of the things that the military wants to do, it's not adequate for getting there. The other challenge that we discussed was the return on investment that a lot of people want to see is really hard to calculate, and it's kind of a marketing activity for anyone who's building their own simulations to calculate that. But data that you could defend return on investment, everybody wants it. It's hard to come up with the source data to defend it.
Thank you. Any others? Any other? Do people find this useful to get to talk to people that they don't normally talk to? And if you do it over 3 days and then you drink together at the bar at night, it's even better for building relationships. And we see companies come together that were once competitors. And anyway.
3 days next year.
All right, so our table was a little bit interesting because it was a pretty good mix of industry and academia. We discussed something in regards to a need to really cross-train engineers more to learn how to use these tools. The problems are in academia, there's no space to add these additional classes, to add kind of cross-training and that sort of thing. So I think there's really, we think there's really a need from a industry perspective to kind of push requirements down to academia to say this is what we need. We need our engineers to have this skill set, and that skill set is the understanding of these tools that we're using now. Another aspect of it is we can also make the tools easier. One way that we talked about very briefly was kind of having multi-level systems. One of my big problems with a lot of these systems, again, because this isn't my background, is there's a lot of power and capability integrated within each of the tools that you guys design. And it gets very confusing and overwhelming to a novice user. Kind of stripping some of that more advanced capability out for novice users would also help to kind of bring more novice users into the process of designing software. And then another one that everyone's touched on, providing additional standards and really a community to support the validation process. It's key. I think everyone's already touched on that though.
I'm just getting this in. Any more? Okay, I think we've used up all the time or more than we were allocated. So thank you very much for your participation.